This film is our interpretation of how our village may have looked in the early 1300s, a period following the Norman conquest. In the late 12th century, the land in this area had been gifted to the Knights Hospitaller, an event that had an enormous impact upon our small village. Situated on a raised bed of land, with watercourses to the north and south flowing to the River Trent, the Barrow-upon-Trent settlement has been dictated by water over the centuries. The two brooks running east-west, directly north and south of the village, seem to be largely contemporary with our 1300 recreation. The evidence of medieval ridge and furrow field systems have them as their natural borders. Several fordable crossings, or shoals, cross the Trent River to the south. These created the ideal opportunity for groups of habitation on this dry island, their names the only reminder of lost stories. Ovenmouth Shoal, Norman's Friend Shoal, Buckham's Ford. The river itself, navigable at this point, has also influenced the passage of people and goods. There is evidence, all around us, that this was the site of an Iron Age village, and there has certainly been a settlement here for nearly 2,000 years. Early maps and LiDAR information indicate that there was no real center of the village, as there is today. Rather, there were several groups of cottages and farmsteads on this fertile Trent Valley land, providing homes, subsistence, and employment. The main road from Twyford in the west, to Barrow-upon-Trent, and then on to Swarkstone in the east, was probably along what is now the existing Twyford Road into the village. From there it would have continued into Chapel Lane, and then followed the public footpath to the eastern extent of the village before heading over the fields to the settlement at Swarkstone. The road to the major town of Derby in the north has possibly changed quite recently, judging by LiDAR data. Prior to Swarkstone Causeway becoming a major crossing, the fords to the south may have been the easiest crossing points for a long time. Indeed, there are field markers leading from Stanton by bridge towards Barrow-upon-Trent that happen to converge on one of the many crossing areas, making Green Lane a likely candidate for a southern road. On drier ground to the north of the village settlement, ridge and furrow fields were worked by the local serfs who lived in Barrow-upon-Trent. Land would have been shared out equally based upon its fertility, so that everyone had a fair share of good and bad soil. Our journey begins in the west of the village. One of the first buildings we encounter, in medieval Barrow-upon-Trent, is the large cruck-framed barn at Walnut Farm. Walnut Farm Barn was a typical three-bay cruck cottage. Each cottage had a narrow strip of land behind it, where the serfs could farm produce for their own use. On today's map these strips of land are still visible in our modern garden layouts. The center of the village was mainly open fields, with a few cottages and farm buildings, very different from today. Many early medieval buildings are shown positioned around our village in this video. We are certain of the position of some, others have been placed as a result of research over the last few years, including archaeology, LiDAR, and old map data. One of the main buildings you will still recognize is the Church of St. Wilfrid. First built by the Anglo-Saxons, by 1300 it had begun its expansion under the Knights Hospitaller. You will also notice the high stone wall on Church Lane, that still exists today. How many of you have walked past this each day, without giving a thought to its age or origins? Just outside the walls lies Hollybush Small Holding, which still stands in the center of the village, hidden behind hedges. Like many other buildings around, it provided a simple dwelling, with shelters for animals and land for the serfs to grow their own produce. This wall encircled the Camera of the Knights Hospitaller, a subsidiary farm where crops could be stored, and a safe area provided for the breeding of valuable produce for the table. The entrance to this camera is thought to have been where the current entrance to the old Barrow Hall can still be seen. A hub of activity, the camera contained the main camera building. This housed the bailiff, responsible for the general administration of the surrounding hospitaller lands. Later, it was to become the base for Hall Park, and Barrow Hall, itself since demolished. The largest building in this compound is the Tithe Barn, probably the most important building in the village for the Knights Hospitaller. Its appearance, with wooden shingles and strongly built walls and roof, reflects this. It was the storage area for the village crops, the tithes that were paid in lieu of taxes by the local villagers. The harvest produce would have been transported to Clerkenwell in London, via the river, to provide income for the hospitallers, to support their work in the Crusades. From written records, we also know that there was a dovecot, where doves were bred for the table. There was also an orchard providing fruit for the camera, and a fish pond, supplying fresh fish all year round. Records state that the hospitaller had a windmill, to provide flour for bread. LiDAR data shows a ring ditch and central mound, to the southwest of St. Wilfrid's. Perhaps this was the location of the windmill. The church you see, in 2023, is unchanged since the final days of the Knights Hospitaller in 1540. In the village of 1300, it was still under development. The original Anglo-Saxon church would have been a relatively simple building, with small open windows. There was a chancel to the east, and the main door into the nave on the west, with a Romanesque style arch. During excavations in 2020, a threshold stone was found in this location, now under the tower. The chancel's east wall we can see today, was rebuilt in the post-medieval period. It is believed the chancel was longer, as shown here. The small priest's door, seen here, is still visible, though missing its small figureheads. The roofline of the church in 1300 was lower than today. The north aisle extension used the original Anglo-Saxon roof height. You will note that there is neither tower nor bells, these were added around 100 years later. Near to the west door stands the Anglo-Saxon font, used to baptize infants prior to their entry into the church for the first time. The current font in St. Wilfrid's dates from the mid-1300s, possibly contemporaneous with the building of the south aisle, yet to be built in this setting. In 1300, the church was highly decorated on the inside. Paint remnants still exist today on the walls and pillars. These are hidden in full sight, unnoticeable unless looking for them. Many churches were decorated with patterns, and occasionally paintings of stories from the Bible. In our video, a pattern has been used to indicate the possible form of the interior decoration. Stone was rarely left blank, the multitude of facets of the arches enabling even more decoration to be added. The north aisle was a major extension carried out by the Knights Hospitaller, and included a tunnel linking it to the chancel. This feature is still in full view today. Between the nave and chancel is a squint. This squint gives a view of the altar from the north wall of the nave. Prior to the building of the north aisle, this was probably the location of an anchor cell. An anchor cell was a small room into which an anchorite was confined for life, leading a life of prayer and contemplation, until death. Opposite the church is one of several very old buildings in the village that still exist today, St. Wilfrid's House. Even into the mid-20th century, this house was part of a much larger holding that included a large field. The field extended from the house across to Twyford Road to the north, with a gated access to the farm buildings, and a yard. This is now known as Dovecot Yard, where Pinfold Cottage now stands. Pinfold Cottage is named after the Pinfold, another surviving remnant of Barrow-upon-Trent's medieval history. It was a place where stray animals could be kept safely. The field originally attached to St. Wilfrid's House, now contains the Sale and Davies School building and playfields, and several residential buildings, extending as far as Furtree Farm. According to old maps, Green Lane has remained largely unchanged since Anglo-Saxon times, giving access to the fields and meadows to the south of the village. The water meadows, to which Green Lane leads, lie either side of the Trent, and are accessed via the shallow shoals, or river fords. LiDAR data also indicates evidence of some ridge and furrow farming in this riverside area. However, over time these lands disappeared, for several reasons. Regular flooding made these fields less desirable for crop growing, and diseases such as the Black Death reduced the manpower available to work them. In early medieval times, another factor was also the rise in the value of sheep. Wool produced from sheep gave a much better income than farmed crops, and the people who worked the land here were probably moved on to create the meadows for sheep pasture. At the junction on Church Lane, where it meets the old road from the north, is a medieval stone building which can still be seen today. Given the building materials, it is likely to have been built as a house. At some point in its history, its use changed to that of a cattle barn. Inside still exist cattle stalls and feeding troughs. A loft for loose hay is above the cattle, and accessed via a rough-sawn wooden ladder. This cattle shed is part of a range of buildings built around a caissie, an area where cattle dung was stored over the winter. In springtime, when the weather had improved, this dung would be spread on pastures, to fertilize the crops. The Boat Quay, a backwater on the north side of the bend in the river, provides a natural harbor for the loading and unloading of boats. Old maps and history indicate that this is an important part of the village infrastructure. It was the place for the traffic of goods and crops, in and out of this part of the river valley. This would have been a very important feature for the Knights Hospitaller, who used this quay to export tithes in the form of crops and goods to their headquarters at Clerkenwell in London. It was also situated very close to the natural fords across the river, and the drovers' roads that passed north to south, through the village. Cottages along the river bank at this point were known to have mooring rings placed in their walls, to enable the tie-up of boats. Crowtrees and Vinegar Hills, now called Trentside, occupy a very strategic position on this sweep of the River Trent, at the end of the lane we now know as Church Lane. The nearby Boat Quay will have provided the employment of the people at this eastern end of the village. Loading and offloading of cargo and people will have been a major occupation when the river was an important highway. A window, in the west end of Crowtrees, was reputedly used as a means of selling goods to river travellers. Although now known as Trentside, the cottage called Vinegar Hills perhaps indicates the occupation of the family residing there. Wine would have been brought up the river and offloaded, for an onward journey to the north or south. Some of this barreled wine may have become unusable, by turning to vinegar. However, in medieval times, this could be used as a disinfectant, for medical use as a wound dressing, or for preserving food. We are now back on the original road, between Swarkstone and Twyford. Moving westwards towards the centre of the village, we are in the area of a settlement that no longer exists, except in the many small troughs and areas of higher land, in the field to the north. LiDAR information shows a series of small buildings, astride the watercourse that flows towards the river, via Vinegar Hills. This appears to be the original main gateway to the village, standing on the main north-south road between Derby and the River Trent crossings, and Boat Quay. This lost group of buildings appears to have been important, standing as it does at the crossroads of the main thoroughfares, both north-south and east-west. It also stands close to a freshwater watercourse. The location indicates that, as the most important part of the village, the smithy would have been located here. Archaeological investigations have already identified many horseshoes in this field. Further west, we come across another small group of homes in the area of the Nook, including Lime Tree Cottage. At this point, we return to the area of the camera and the main village buildings. Whilst our village has changed much over the last 800 years, the past is visible for all to see if the time is taken to look in the right places.